Good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to the second in the series of TSG SharePoint Month webinars. Today is all about compliance, and that's why we've called it Control Freaks. And as with the first webinar, we'll actually spend most of the morning, largely due to Tony's dislike of PowerPoint, in a live SharePoint environment, and we'll switch across to that very shortly. We're guessing that, it's always difficult with webinars because you can't see your audience, but we're guessing you maybe look something like this. So if you do, then hopefully by the end of today you'll feel a bit less stressed and think there's a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of keeping control over the systems and solutions that you need and the people that you need to keep control of, and the processes. I'll start again with a couple of brief introductions. Again, for those of you who were with us last week, I'm joined by Tony Hughes. Again, he's been working with SharePoint for 14 years, technically now 14 years in a week. Again, that's since its inception. Again, for fear of Tony not getting out of the room that we're in, he has been the brains behind some of TSG's most complex and successful deployments. I'm Stephen Green. I'll try and make sure everything runs smoothly today, and I'll be looking for any questions that you might have for Tony. Just to remind you that this is number 2, and there are another 3 webinars to follow this. So again, hopefully you will encourage relevant colleagues to join us. The previous webinar, the Technology All-Rounder, is now available in the SharePoint section of tsg.com, and you can see the exact URL for that in front of you. And if you experience any issues with sound or the broadcast of today's webinar, then we'll get the webinar of today's recording online as soon as possible. And again, I hope that you'll feel that it's appropriate to share that with colleagues. Before I hand over to Tony, we talked about the SharePoint 3 Eyes last week, and again, have that in your mind today when we're going through the examples that Tony will show you. Think about how you can relate what we're showing you to the issues that you have within your business, and use your imagination to apply the same kind of principles to the challenges that you face. And again, always have in the back of your mind that SharePoint isn't about technology, it's about business improvement. And if you can focus on that, then I think you'll get a lot out of what we're going to cover today. So very briefly, it is about compliance. So that could be ISO 9001, it could be whatever regulatory issues that you need to cover within the business, whether they're driven by legislation or whether they are driven simply by improving the way the business operates. We're going to touch on document management because that's a core element, version control, a little bit on workflow because that's going to be the focus of the next session, and it's all about making sure that people adhere to the right process and practices, and that you can put those structures in place to make it easy and efficient for people to do that. So on that note, we are again presenting this PowerPoint from the Office 365 environment, which means Tony can very much seamlessly flick across, and I'll hand across the reins to Tony.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Good morning, everybody. To those who attended last week, thanks for coming back, and welcome to any new attendees today. What I want to do is just drop back just to one of the areas we looked at last week. And here we're now looking at a SharePoint site that's set up just as an example to show typically how we would manage documents and the processes behind a document management system. So things like change requests, internal logs, corrective actions, etc., etc. And what I'm hopefully going to demonstrate today is how we use the core features and functionality of SharePoint to build such a system. We also use SharePoint within TSG to manage our ISO 9001 system, and we've also built a number of systems for clients to help those in their ISO compliance management, their quality management systems, etc., etc. So, okay, let's move on. So the next sort of half an hour, 40 minutes will be a true SharePoint demonstration. I'll be showing you the functionality, the features, etc., and how we build a solution around that. Just before I start that, one thing I want to say is that in the past, the functionality you're going to see today is often being quite cost prohibitive for smaller to medium size organizations, because off-the-shelf document management solutions can be costly. I think Microsoft were very clever in saying, well, as part of the SharePoint environment, let's give document management functionality because it's key to many businesses. And in past employment, I've worked for companies who've just actually deployed large enterprise document management solutions, and in the old days they were, upwards of £1,000 per user. If we think about the Office 365 or SharePoint Online environment, we're getting all this for £3.10 per user per month in effect, which is pretty good value for money. Okay, so just before I actually start, I just wanted to do a very quick one slide of a PowerPoint, just to really try to get over to you how we structure a SharePoint environment. SharePoint basically is built around what we call initially sites inside a SharePoint environment. So what we're looking at here is, in effect, all SharePoint environments will have a home page. That may be used for the Betty's had a baby scenario, but it could also be used for more business-related activities, such as which documents are waiting my approval. All that information could be rendered onto a home page. And underneath that, generally we would have sites for particular areas or functions within the business. So here I've got sales, operations, quality, human resources, finance. You might have different ones in your organization. You might have an area to manage documentation around particular products which you produce or particular services you provide. And then what we do is, within these sites is where we store the documents, the data, and the processes required for that part of the business. So for example, inside SharePoint we store documents in document libraries, data which in the past we may have stored in Excel, we can store in SharePoint using data or lists, and we can have the support and workflows for those processes. And one thing to be aware as well is that sites can have sub-sites. So we're not just fixed at this sort of level one tier type of environment. We can have a much more of a pyramid type of environment within SharePoint. Okay, so let's look at documents first. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is create a document library. I just need to minimize this. Stephen, just how can I move that across? Is that? Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do is create a document library, and I'm going to use this to store documents, and as we go through the seminar, show how we can then advance that into how we can manage documents, etc., etc. So let's just create a document library. So we're just using standard functionality. We're going to say we want to create a document library, and we want to call this, just say, our policies. Just while this is building the document library, you can have as many document libraries as you want in a site, and if need be, document libraries can have different permissions within a site as well. So if I now click on my policies, I'm in effect now viewing that document library. Okay, if I just go back to the main view of this site, then on the left hand side I've got policies. I click on that, it opens that document library. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick bit of configuration on this document library because Microsoft changed the way they set up their default document libraries, so I just want to make sure there's no versioning on this initially. Okay, so I've got a document library now. How do I put documents into it? Well, I can use the upload function, okay, and browse and upload a document into the document library. I can also, from the new button, I can create Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc., etc. In this panel here where it's saying create a new file, we can get more sophisticated and in there have things like create a new policy, create a new procedure, create a new work instruction or process document. And they can draw in centralized templates in the background. So we can make this much more sophisticated than we're actually going to see today. Okay. Another way of getting documents into a document library is actually just using drag and drop. So I'm just going to say show the desktop. And then just simply, hopefully, if I get this right, I should be able to just drag that document into there. Okay, so I've pulled in a document and it's called Health and Safety. You can see it was modified a few seconds ago, and it was modified by Tony Hughes because I uploaded it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is actually edit this document with no control whatsoever regarding to versioning, just to see how that works. Just while I do that, if I did not have the permissions to edit this document, I wouldn't see the likes of edit. All the controls within SharePoint are trimmed according to your permissions. So I'm just going to say edit document. All right, so it's just going to download the document. Okay, it says SharePoint month, our health and safety policy. Don't let the excitement of these seminars put your welfare at risk. I didn't want to write a full health and safety document because it doesn't really turn me on or anything like that. So I'm just going to say this is a change. I'm going to save that document. I'm going to close it in Word. I'm going to go back into SharePoint. All right, and what we will now see on the little preview, it doesn't always work that bit, is hopefully, sorry, let me just make that full screen, as you can see that this is a change. Okay, so that document has been edited, but it's been overwritten. Okay, so I've done that with no control, no management in effect of that. Okay, now the versioning functionality is configured at a document library level. Okay, so we can have some document libraries which have got a lot of versioning configured, other document libraries which don't. There might just be, you know, company announcements or newsletters which you want to upload into SharePoint, and you're not particularly bothered about versioning or anything like that. Okay, so let's just look at the versioning. So if I go to the library settings, then one of the options I've got are versioning settings. Okay, so the first thing is that I can make a decision as to what type of versioning do I want. So I can either say, well, I want no versioning, which is what I've currently got, so I've in effect just overwritten that document. Or I can say I want to create major versions, so for example version 1, version 2, version 3, etc. Or I can create major and minor, or what we call draft versions. So I can create 1, 1.1, 1.2, and then when I'm happy I can create version 2 as the next published version. That sort of scenario might be in use for things like tender responses, where we might create a document, somebody might, you know, put some information in regarding the technical aspects of the tender and then save that as a version, and then somebody else picks it up and says, right, well, I'm going to do the commercials and create a version, etc., etc. But what we'll do is we'll just say we want to create major versions. We can also control who can see what we call draft items in the document library. What this means is that even when a document is under review, we can still just ensure that the end user only sees the last approved version of the document. Okay. One thing which is key is the notion of checkout. This allows us to take ownership of a document. Other people can see I've got ownership of the document, and it is the check-in and check-out procedure which actually triggers the new versions of a document. Okay, and finally what I'm going to do for this scenario is saying, well, I also want content approval as well. Okay, so before a document is published as a new version, somebody with the approval rights has got to come in and say, yes, I approve that. Okay, and all of this process has been traced in the background for audit as an audit trail. So when we come in and get audited and people say, how did you get from version 1 to version 2 and who did the approval, etc., we can make that information available. Yeah. Right, so now what I'm actually going to do is go back to this document library, all right, and I'm just actually going to, in fact I don't think I did that right there, just let me double check. Now it helps if you actually click the OK button, create major versions and require checkout. Okay. Okay, right, so I'm just going to modify this view just to show a couple of little bits of more information. And what I want to show is who's the document checked out to and what's the version. Right, so now I can see anyone coming into this document library will see that the health and safety document was modified 4 minutes ago by Tony Hughes. Its current status is approved, it's not checked out to anyone, and it's version 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do is exactly the same thing as I did before. I'm just going to click on this and say, right, I want to edit this document. And we'll start to see some of its interaction with Word now. At the top here you can see, well, checkout is required. So basically, to continue editing this document, the first thing I've got to do is check it out. So if I check that document out now, and we'll just pop back into SharePoint, okay, it's now saying, right, version 2 is currently pending and is checked out to Tony Hughes. So I've got control of this document now. I'm in effect the owner of the document now. So if I say this is a controlled change, and I can save the document, and if I say, right, I want to close it, it'll come up and say, right, other users cannot see your changes until you check it in. Do you want to check it in now? Now, let's say it's 5 o'clock at night and I've been working on this document and I know I'm going to continue to work on it tomorrow or next week. Then what I can do is say, no, I don't want to check it out. And in the background, SharePoint will save the document in its status as it is now. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, right, I want to check it in because I'm in effect finished with it. I can put on version comments. So these could be, you know, updated in accordance with health and safety clause 6.7. Okay. All right. So now if I go back here, I'll just do a quick refresh. Okay, the document is still pending, but it's no longer checked out to me. Okay, now in a more complete environment, we would now have the option to say to somebody, right, submit for approval. Okay, so we might configure a little drop down on here, in here to say, right, submit for approval. That could trigger a workflow, notify the relevant person that it needs to be approved, etc., etc. Okay, but what I'm going to do here just manually is just I'm going to come in and say, right, I'm going to approve this document. So here we've got the options of approve, reject, or I can leave it as pending and put comments in. But I can come in here and say, you know, good work, okay. All right, so that document is now approved, and in effect it's now made available to all the readers of that document, and you can see on the little preview here, I know it's difficult, but this, you see where our control change is.
So, Tony, this kind of goes back really to the point you made last week about email not being a process. And,
exactly.
and this actually, you can imagine that, you know, in previous times that people would bounce these kind of documents and nobody would have any idea who was editing what, you know, you might have five different versions of the same document.
Yeah, so what we'd find in the past is somebody would attach a document to an email and send it to the head of quality and say, can you please approve this document? He would say yes and then save it to a network drive and inadvertently overwrite the previous one, for instance. You know, or have to remember to put it in the published folder rather than the archive folder. Its name ordinarily would not be health and safety. It would be health and safety V5 June 2013 th approved.doc or something like that, where with SharePoint, in effect, the health and safety document here we're looking at is always just the health and safety document. It's SharePoint in the background, which is managing the version, keeping the previous versions, etc., etc. And just to show that, I can click on here and say, well, let's have a look at the version history. right? And here it's saying, right, this is the current approved version of the document is version 2, and its comments were updated in accordance with Health and Safety Clause 6.7. We can have on there if we need to, approver comments, etc., etc. And there are options in here. So if I go to version 1, I can delete that, I can restore it, I can view it. But if I restore it, it's actually compliant with standard document management functionality that it will restore that as version 3, and it will have to be approved, etc., etc. You're not just overwriting anything. Okay. And if I just want to have a view of any of these documents, so if I come in here and just say I want to look at the version history, and I say I'll have a look at this one, it'll open it inside Word. Okay, but because the document is being managed by SharePoint, so you can't do this on a standard network drive, is we have the ability to say, well, I want to review this, and can you please compare this with the last version? And it'll actually go away and give you a view showing what was added, what was deleted, what was changed on the documents, etc. Okay, so we can see what we inserted. And if need be, we can actually save this as a document, as a comparison. So if we want to get really, really compliant, we can start to save this sort of information. And one thing to bear in mind as well here is that using SharePoint to manage your documents doesn't take away any other functionality out of Office. So if I still want to use track changes or anything like that, I can still do that. Okay. SharePoint is just managing the versioning. Okay. So I hope you see that for actually, you know, how many things have I got to open here? Right, close. You know, is that it's pretty good document management functionality. Okay, and it even works if you receive documents from an external source. So, you know, a lot of smaller organizations have health and safety consultants who will provide you with a new health and safety policy. Is that if you just upload a document into SharePoint and it's got the same name as an existing document, it will activate the version control. So even if we're using PDF files and uploading them, as long as the name is the same, as long as the health and safety is always health and safety, we can still use all of this functionality. Okay. So that's just a little bit about the versioning. And in some companies are quite happy just to have it like that. You know, if you're a small organization and you've got one person who manages the quality system or things like that, then that might be enough for them. Where you start to get the real power is when we start to add metadata to these documents. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some metadata, which in SharePoint is called column data. Okay, so what I want to do in this document library is say, right, well, every document in here has to go through a review process. So what I want to do is say, when is the next review date?
Tony, can I just stop you there? By metadata, if anybody's not sure what metadata means, it's additional tags that are added to a file that allow you to search and to order or to and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, and to automate processes as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is say, right, when somebody puts a document in here, I want to know when the next review date is, so I'm going to make that a date and time. Okay, so I'll make that mandatory. Okay, from that, I don't want to be notified on the day it needs to be reviewed. I want a review reminder date, and we can do things like calculated columns, so we can say, well, this is the next review date, -31, return that as a date and time. Okay, I might say, well, who is the approver of this document? Now, I'm just going to put a name in here. What we would normally do for larger organizations, we would have some sort of matrix in the background. So for instance, if it was a policy to do with order processing, we would define that relationship elsewhere in SharePoint. So if that person changed, this would automatically flow flow through into the system, but I'm just going to say it's a person. And again, I'm going to make that mandatory. All right, and the last one I'm going to put on here is a document owner. And again, make that a person, make that mandatory, and OK that. So if we now go back to our policies document library, you can now see I've got things on here where I've got, right, well, what's the next review date? When's the reminder date? Who's the approver? Who's the document owner, etc. Now, even changing metadata on SharePoint documents activates version control, which is right in effect. But for the purpose of this demo, it may sound a bit crazy, but I'm going to turn off the versioning, because now every time I try to make a change just to the metadata, it's going to ask me to check it in, check it out, approve, etc., etc. So I'm just going to switch all of this off. Right. Just so we've got more time. Right, so now if I say, right, well, I just want to edit the properties, and now I can say, right, well, the next review date for this document is the 30th of May. The approver is Tony Hughes, and the document owner is Andrew Wolf. Okay. What we've now got is most of the information required to automate the ongoing review of these documents. So when it hits the 29th of April, when it reaches the 29th of April, I can have a workflow which says, right, okay, check the document out to the document owner, send him an email and tell him that this document is awaiting his review. Okay. When he undertakes his review, the workflow can then say, right, he's submitted it for approval. I'll now need to send an email to Tony Hughes to say, can you approve this document? Okay. So the metadata side of it is absolutely key to automating the document management process in SharePoint if you want to take it to that level. Okay. What it also allows us to do is if I'm just going to upload another document. And we'll just pull in this one here. Is because we've applied metadata, I've got to fill that metadata in before I can actually get the document into SharePoint. So I'll say, well, right, the next review date is then this one is Cash, and the document owner is Walter. Okay. So now, when I've also got this information, I can also come in and say, can you show me all documents which have to be approved by Tony Hughes? Okay. Or by Cash. Okay. And so the metadata also allows us to control views on the document library as well. So just to show you a quick example of that, is I might say, well, I want to create another view on this. Right, and I might say I want to have a view which shows me the documents by owner. I can dictate what columns I want to show on that view. How do I want to sort them? So I'll say, well, sort them by document owner. I can put filters on. Okay, but just an easy way to see this is to say, well, group them together by document owner. And okay that. So now when I'm looking at the document owner, I can say, well, here's everything which Andrew Wolf owns, here's everything which Walter Miles owns. Any metadata we can use to control views. So if we wanted to categorize our documents to say, well, this is a policy, this is a procedure, this is a work instruction, then we can use that to group the documents together. So if we just go back to the site we looked at last week, if we look at Control Freaks, this is what I was doing here. So I've got all these documents grouped by, well, these are to do with credit control, these are to do with order processing, etc., etc. Okay. So that's just basically a very a quick overview of the standard document management functionality in SharePoint, how we can apply metadata to categorize the documents. And what I want to show you now quickly is just how we go about developing workflows. Now, you can develop workflows using SharePoint Designer, but it is horrible, I suppose, is the best way to do it. It's all code, it's not flexible, you don't get any visualization. What I'm going to do here is just show you quickly workflow development using Nintex workflow. And I think this is good as well, because if you're not really sure about what a workflow is, this will give you a much better indication to it.
And Tony, this is really just a whistle stop across Nintex, because Nintex is going to be the real feature of next week, and we're going to touch on that as well the week after in terms of mobility as well. So this is a whistle stop tour, and you'll see more next week as well.
Okay. So what we can basically do is say, well, within a workflow, what I might want to do is assign a task to somebody. Okay. So I can say, right, I want to assign a task. So who do you want to assign that task to? And what I can do is say, right, well, the person here, where it's saying enter email address or whatever, I can say is the current items. Where did I put the reviewer? No, document owner. Did I call it document owner? There it is, sorry. All right, so I want to assign the task to the document owner. Because these workflows run on items, it will look at whatever document I've initiated this workflow and find the document owner. So whether that's Andrew Wolf, Walter, etc. So we're not hard coding anything in here. Okay. The task title, I could say, please review. And then what we can do is within these things is we can say, right, we'll also go to the current item and get the name. Okay, so that would say, please review health and safety, document as ISO 9001 requires, and so on. So we can do things like say, well, what's the due date? How long am I going to give them? Okay, so we could say, well, we'll give them 2 weeks to do it, etc., etc. Okay, what task outcomes do we want? Right? Here I'm only giving them 2. He either approves it, rejects it, or we could say we want to defer it or something like that. Okay. We can allow things like lazy approval. So if I actually send something to somebody and say, can you approve this? They can just respond to the email generated by the system and say yes, no, approved, approve, etc. And the system will go away and automatically carry out that process under their name. Okay. We can do things like create reminder emails and things like that. Okay, you have an overdue task. So if we want to get Big Brother, we can do. Okay. So and then what we can do is say, well, okay, if we've assigned somebody a task, and if he says he wants to approve it, then what we can do is do things like, if I can find where it is, set. There you go. So I want to set the document, not the document set, but we'll just use that for anyway. Set the document's approval status to approved. Okay, and then it would automatically trigger. I might then actually say also update the item and set the next review date to 12 months in advance or 6 months in advance or anything like that. So not only are we actually using a workflow to go through the approval process, we're also using the workflow to get that document ready for its next review as well. Okay. So when we start to use the standard functionality in SharePoint, so we use a version control, we start to use a metadata, and then we start to use a workflow. And what we can do the same thing here in SharePoint Designer. It's just that if I did that on this presentation, you wouldn't actually understand what I was doing, because I would be typing if, else, and stuff like that.
And Tony, this again goes back to the point you made last week about where possible, or we won't use compiled code. We won't use, and so it's a very, very intuitive way to build things, and it means that you're not beholden to the kind of the logic that any individual puts onto how a process or a flow would work.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that if you do want to go back and it's not the same person, then it makes controlling it or updating it or viewing it and revising it much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and because Microsoft are in effect, well, within the Office 365 or the SharePoint Online environment, if we take that approach, next year when they release SharePoint 2016, all of this should just work because they will have tested all of their standard functionality, etc., etc. He says with a wry smile on his face, crossing his fingers. So. Okay, so that's covered the document management side of it. The other thing I wanted to do was really, behind a document management system, there are also other processes other than just the management of the documents. Now, let's say we wanted to provide a mechanism for members of the business or users to come in and actually request a change to a particular policy. Let's say they feel that the policy, is a bit woolly in a particular area or needs a little bit more refinement. As we mentioned it earlier, email is not a business process. We don't just want them to email us and say our current health and safety policy refers to the maximum height you can go up a ladder of 18 foot. Health and safety executive have now reduced that to 16 foot because that might get missed. Somebody might forget about it, etc., etc. So what we want to do is build a process in SharePoint where we can manage that, progress it, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do is just build a quick change request log just to show you how we manage that sort of requirement around the document management system. So I'm just going to say I want to add an app. And what I'm going to use here is what's called a custom list. We'll go into these in much more detail next week. This is basically the function we use to use SharePoint to capture data, to create electronic forms, and to process that data, etc. So I'm going to say, right, I want to create a custom list, and this is my change requests. Probably people refer to it as a change request log or whatever. So if I now go into my change requests, if I can see them, there we go, and I say, right, I want to add a new item in here, it's just going to say a title because Microsoft don't know what a change request is. He says that tongue-in-cheek because it must get plenty. But we're just using a standard function here. All I'm doing is using SharePoint's standard basic data capture functionality. So what I need to do is say, well, what fields do I want the user to fill in? So what I can do is go to the settings for this list, and it looks very similar to the document library settings because in effect what we're doing is we're creating fields which we want to capture. Okay, we can have versioning on these as well. Okay, in fact I'll just switch that on so we can see what happens. So create a version. Alright, and then I've got to decide what fields do I want. Okay, so I'm just going to say what's the change request? So I want to tell them what is it, just as a headline. I want them to tell me what the detail is, and I want to give them multiple lines of text for that, and I want that mandatory. I want to have a status. All right, so here I'm going to give the user a choice, make it mandatory, and say it's either in the status of it's being logged, it's in progress, or it's complete. And I'll create another one which is simply just the what was the outcome, stroke corrective actions or something like that. We'll have multiple lines of text in there. Okay, and we'll just make one little switch just so it looks a bit prettier. launching dialogues. Okay. Right, so now if I go back to my change requests, okay, and I say new item, then I'm presented with a form. Right, now, I think I mentioned this last week, this could be any type of data capture required in the organization. It doesn't, here we're just using it in a document management, in a quality management system type of environment. It could be anything. Anything you potentially use in Excel for now, you're using paper forms for, you're using Access databases, etc., etc. So I might just say I want to change the ladder height. What's the detail? It's now 6 foot from 8 foot. All right. Again, in a more complete example, at this point when we create something, we wouldn't present the user with what's the status or what's the outcome. Okay. If I save that, then it's going to log that. Okay. It's just logged some information. I could have a workflow which is triggered on this list that when somebody creates a new item, it sends an email to the Health and Safety Director to see if somebody's put in a new change request. Okay. If I pick that up, I can say, all right, okay, I'm going to edit that. It's now in progress. I'm going to save it. All right, I'll wait a few hours or do whatever. I might come back and say, actually, I need to edit this again. It's now complete. And what was the outcome? We updated the policy accordingly and save that. Okay. I've also got version history on this, so I can see who did what when. So the old answer of no, I didn't. Now we can say, unfortunately, yes, you did, and here's your P45. Is that the right one? Or P60? I can't remember. So even the data behind that process, you know, we can version control. We can have, you know, a history of what happened when. Just to show you a little bit more about the list functionality, here I might actually say, well, when they put in a change request, I might say, what document or document related, and here I can do a lookup, and I can say, well, present the user, all right, with stuff out of our policies, and present him with the title of the document. All right, so in here now, if I edit this on the document related, got the wrong one. I should be able to there to see a health and safety policy or whatever PDF file I pulled in. Right, because I haven't got any titles on these. I'll just quickly pop back into here a minute and just edit one of these. Edit properties. Right, I'll just do the same with the other one. At least you can see that it's a live demo. Copy that, paste that. So if I go back to my change request now, and I say edit item, and hopefully there we go, so I can see, well, this relates to the health and safety document. Okay, so over time as we build up these change requests, so if I put another one in there, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to put Gubbins in. I can say, well, this is to do with document 1.3. Is that we can track all back-end processes around those documents. And these list items can also have workflow associated with them. Okay. So I'm just conscious of time because we're at 11:46. So just a couple of things I wanted to show as well. And this is just really standard SharePoint functionality. Is one, if you want to know about changes and things which are happening in a particular document library, you can use things like Alert Me. Okay. So we can come in and say, right, send alerts to these people. So I can add other people in here. I can say I also need Walter to know. Right. Send them alert either via email or text message if you've got your infrastructure set up as to what type of changes, you know, so when new items are added or when anything changes, or we can say someone else changes a document. Someone else changes a document created by me. And then how do we want to be alerted? Do we want an immediate notification, a daily summary, or a weekly summary? Okay, so we can push information out that way. Excuse me. If you want to make have these documents available offline, and let's say the only device we have is the laptop and it's got Outlook on it, then we can use things like Connect to Outlook. Okay, and what that will do is take a copy of these documents, put them in an Outlook folder locally on your machine, but every time you do a send receive, if any changes have been made to these documents, that will be reflected in your Outlook. Okay. And then the last one really is to say if you are in the full Office 365 environment and you've got OneDrive, is you can actually just say, well, synchronize these to my OneDrive. Okay. And obviously what that means is if I've got OneDrive on my phone or I've got OneDrive on my iPad, then these documents are available as well. So we can see now that locally on my machine here, I've now got control freaks, demo policies, etc., etc.
And Tony, if you edit those documents using OneDrive, does that then reflect back?
Yeah, as long as nobody's edited them the other side.
Right.
So what we tend to say is that you should consider OneDrive as just read-only information.
Right. Okay.
Okay. All right. So we can do that via OneDrive. So if I was just going to upload another document into here, so if we say that one there. Okay. I've already uploaded that one. It was the wrong one. It's number 2 I wanted. Let's just write some stuff in here. I'll put Walter, put a date in there, 3rd, check in. Alright, so once that document's in there, if I just go to my OneDrive and just say sync now. Oops, wrong one, sorry. It's under me control freaks. I've now got those 2 documents in there. Okay. So that's just showing a little bit of mobility as well. And I guess just the final thing before we close and answer any questions is just around about the search as we've been putting information in here. On one of those documents I used the word control because I said this is or was it controlled? Let me just have a look. Let's just go back just so we can get the right document. So if we go to my policies, and let's just say we want to view that. There you go. So we've got that. We've got controlled in there. So we can come back in here and say search for controlled, and fingers crossed that document should be returned to us. There we go. Okay. So I hope that gives you an overview. If there's any questions come through.
And again, you'd only see that document in your search results if you've got permission to access. That's right, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to do these questions now?
Excellent. Well, if there are any questions, then we'd be happy to take them. But it looks like it's either stunned silence from you all, or you've been like me. You've been concentrating incredibly hard to follow some of the stuff that Tony's been running through today. I'm right in thinking that no, absolutely. We've got one question. It's a question on cost. How much is it for Nintex Office 365? How much is Nintex for Office 365?
Right, Nintex Office 365. It includes Nintex Workflow, which is what we had a brief glimpse at today, and it also includes Nintex forms, which we'll show a lot more of in the next 2 seminars, where Nintex forms allows us to capture data offline via multiple devices. It starts on an annual subscription basis for Office 365. It's £2,100 per annum, and that's for up to 100 users. Thereafter, you buy them in 100 user packs.
Okay, that's great. So hopefully that answers the question, and obviously depending on how many users you're going to have, that actually makes it incredibly reasonable. Next question that we've got in is, does SharePoint manage clients, and in brackets access type functionality? Does that make any sense to you, Tony? I'm not sure. It's probably beyond my skill set.
I think this may relate to, well, I might be miles off here, but when you say managed clients, I assume we're talking about some sort of maybe CRM type of functionality. If so, in effect, SharePoint is a big database. In effect, so we can create, client lists, contact details, all sorts of stuff. We have built small CRM solutions inside SharePoint, but what I would say is that if you have sophisticated CRM requirements, then you buy a CRM application.
Okay, so hopefully that answers the question. If not, if you want to come back, we've got another question coming in. New to 365 version, how do you edit forms? Info Path Designer, we currently use 2010. Can you transfer data from 2010 to 365? So there's a couple of questions in there, Tony.
I'll start off with the migration. Yes, you can migrate from 2010 to Office 365 SharePoint. You have 2 options. You can do a manual migration, and what I mean by that is drag and drop documents from your 2010 into your Office 365. List data can be more complex. If the lists are fairly standard, we can export them to Excel and then re-import them into Office 365. But you can buy migration tools from the likes of ShareGate, Metalogics, which do a much more sophisticated migration, and you can step that migration, so do a bit at a time, test it, deploy it, etc. How do you edit forms? You can go to a list. So if I go back to my change requests, it's not something I do. That by default, SharePoint Online or Office 365, you can customize the list form in InfoPath, or you can customize it using Nintex forms, which is much more sophisticated. Or yes, you could do it in SharePoint Designer if you really wanted to, but I wouldn't advise that.
Okay. Another question coming in. Have you ever done any timesheet-based solutions to capture time spent on specific projects?
Yes. The answer to
Do you want to illuminate on that, Tony?
Right. What we basically have, I mean, I'm quite happy to crack on here if people want to stay on, just in case we might get kicked out of this room. But it's using standard functionality all the time is what we try to do. So what we would say is, right, if we want to capture timesheet information, the first thing we need to know is, right, what do we want to put that timesheet information against, right? So we would say create a custom list, and what you'll start to see is that a custom list is one of the most important parts of SharePoint. I want to create a list of projects which I want to allocate time against. Okay, so I'll go to my projects. There we go. And all I'm going to do here, I could have additional columns where I've got, the project name, the cost center, who the project manager is, whatever. But just for speed, I'm literally just going to have one field, right? So I'm going to say, right, I've got project A. If anyone can put a hand up and tell us what I'm going to type next, I'll give you a free version of Nintex workflow, but I won't, I'm only joking, because I'm going to say project Z. Stick your data up, Tony. Right. Project G. Right, so I've got a list of projects. What I'm now going to say is, right, I want to create another app. Oops, sorry. Stay on this page. I forget to click that button. So there's my projects. So I'm going to create another app, which is my custom list again. Timesheet data. Now I'm going to keep this really simple as well, right? So in my timesheet data, what I want people to tell me is, we'll just leave that there. I want to know what project. So here we'll do a lookup. We'll make it mandatory and we'll look up our project. Okay. I want to know the date you did the work, so date and time. Make it mandatory. I'll say hours. We'll make that a number. Make it mandatory. So you can't log anything less than half an hour, and your maximum is 7.5. Right. And then the old classic is this overtime. Yes, no, and we'll default it to no. Because what we can do there is if somebody fills in a timesheet entry and they say overtime yes, we can trigger a workflow to actually say what needs to be approved by the project manager or the partner or whatever. All right. Now I've got no fancy interface to this at all. But what I could actually do is say, right, I want to edit this, so I'm just going to say which project was it? I worked on project 1. What was the date? It was the 16th. I did 5 hours and it wasn't overtime. Oh, I need to put a title in, sorry. So that might be, so I might say, who's who answered that question? I know that guy, so. So I might say here, this is, I'm working on the east elevation, east elevation drawing for project 2 on the 15th, and I did 2 hours, and yes, that was overtime. Right. Now on this view you're probably wondering, well, how do I know who it was? Again, when we create something in SharePoint, it knows who's created it. So what we've got now is we say, well, also who was it created by? I'll put that at number 1. So in effect, here's the information. Tony Hughes worked on that project then and did that number of hours. And again, we can build views around that, show me them by project, show me all the overtime, show me by person, whatever.
Excellent.
So it can be as simple as that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that little bit of ad-libbing at the end, Tony. We don't have any more questions. If you do have any questions that you want to take offline, then feel free to get in touch with us. We'll put a slide on in a second which has some contact details. I mentioned earlier that we've recorded the website. We've recorded the webinar, and that will go on the website as soon as we can get that edited and uploaded. I think there was a lot to take in there, so I would imagine that some of you probably do want to review that. I also think that one of what you've seen today demonstrates the fact that just looking at the back end and the menus, that we can go from the very simple, built very quickly, as Tony's done here, to the very complex. Clearly, Tony's SharePoint skills are way better than his typing skills, which is just as well. But I know from my own perspective that I'm already thinking about things that I'd love to be able to do with SharePoint in the marketing department. But it's back to those 3 I's. I know that some of the things that are challenges for us in the marketing team, and I know that there are things that we could certainly use SharePoint for within the team to make improvements. And it's just about transferring those ideas. One final thing I would say, and this is looking forward to the session number 5, which is on the 14th of May. There's a hole in my bucket, Well, on that day, Tony will transform into Liza, and it's about getting you to throw challenges at us in exactly the same ways that we've just seen there. That, you know, can we create a timesheet solution? Well, yes, we can, and we're actually, and Tony very quickly was able to do that. So what we're looking for is some suggestions of what you would like us to build, and, you know, Tony very bravely is up here kind of doing this all live without the aid of a safety net, which is probably way past our health and safety policies. But it is a great opportunity for you to have a think about what you might want us to do, and please feel free to fire those through. Again, you can send those to us either at info@tsg.com or direct to Tony. Again, you know, if you've got anything that you want to push through on the next couple of webinars, then we'd be happy to include those. So really, all that remains for me to say is thank you very much for joining us. Apologies that we've eaten into a little bit of the second hour, but hopefully there was a lot of value in doing that. I'd like to say thank you for Tony for his time. And I'd also urge you again to make sure, if you haven't already, sign up for the next 3 webinars. You will see more about Nintex workflow. You will see more about mobility, and again, you'll see Tony building stuff live, which is a pretty brave thing to do. So we look forward to seeing you. We look forward to you sharing this with your colleagues, and thank you very much for joining us. We will hopefully see you next Thursday.